broken wings and learn to fly all your life. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see all your life. You were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly into the light of a dark black night. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly into the light of a dark black night. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly all your life. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. You were only waiting for this moment to arise.
Good morning, Nexus friends. Good to be with you again. Just a quick announcement as we get going here this morning. Next Sunday morning, we're going to do, after the service, a Zoom family meeting together. We're going to keep next Sunday's service short to a half hour, and a link will be provided in the Nexus Weekly and in the YouTube description below next week for Zoom meeting. And we're going to meet together because we realize that there's probably a lot of questions out there. And so it'll be a good opportunity for us to chat together as a community, to see each other as well. That'll be cool. But specifically, we want to talk about summer plans. What is this summer going to look like? A very different summer. And of course, what it might look like for Nexus to reopen to services, in-person services in the future. So those are the two things we specifically want to talk about, but I'm sure there'll be other questions as well. So we want to carve out time for that. But I hope you will put it in your calendar next Sunday. The service will be short, and then we'll hop onto Zoom together and talk about summer plans, reopening plans, and any other questions that you might have about Nexus right now. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to John and Sarah Benjamins, and I'm always amazed by the immense talent in our community, and they have prepared a wonderful, wonderful song for us this morning. So John and Sarah, over to you.
Hello. Today I'm going to be singing for you a song written by Franz Schubert called An die Musik. It's in German, and this is traditionally the type of song that I'm trained to sing, so I learned to sing kind of more classical. The song is in German, but I'm just going to first read it to you, this translation, the English, so that you can kind of get your head around what I'm singing. So, to music. You lovely art, in how many gloomy hours, when life's fierce orbit entangled me, have you kindled my heart to warmer love? Have you carried me away to a better world? Often has a sigh flown from your harp, a sweet, holy chord from you, unlocked for me the heavens of better times. You lovely art, I thank you for this. You lovely art, I thank you. And so we're just going to play. John's going to play for you, and I'm going to sing. And I think it's kind of a fortuitous song for the time we're in, especially personally for me, because I feel like, it's kind of a gloomy time. And the thing that's kind of helped me through all of this has been music. So we wanted to share this with you.
How to imagine power. When I think about power, I often think of world leaders, be it a dictator, or a president, or a prime minister. Sometimes I think of weapons or armies, force and influence, even natural things like volcanoes or hurricanes. Power in our minds can conjure up a lot of images for us. So how do we imagine God's power? A few weeks ago, I introduced you to some old friends of mine, friends who have different sort of beliefs, friends who, for instance, believe that God is the cause, God's power is the cause of everything in our universe. Others who see God's power as a force that intervenes in a world occasionally and sort of inexplicably. But the question for me is, might there be a better way to think of God's power? Now, Catherine Sonderegger believes one of the best images we have of God's power in Scripture actually comes from the story of Moses' encounter with God in a burning bush. This is what it says in Exodus 3. Now, Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Now, this is something to work with. Moses encounters God through a bush that is on fire, but the bush is not consumed by the fire, which I probably don't need to remind us is not how fire normally works. I've long been fascinated with fire. It's just so magnetic. And when I was in grade 6, you had to do, I don't know if you remember, science experiments and projects back in the day. So that was the task. And I decided I wanted to do mine on fire, something to do with fire. So I was asking my dad to help. What could we do with fire? And he came up with this idea. And I have a feeling my dad's going to think I imagined this, but I remember it very clearly. My dad came up with the idea that we would see what kind of thing or spray put out fire quickest and best and most efficient. And so what we decided to do is we lined up, we were going to light a little fire, and we were going to test whether or not a direct line of spray like that works better, or no, not that, or, a spray, like a spray, a mist. So direct line or mist. That was the, I think there was vinegar in there. It smells vinegary. That was the experiment. Now, why we did this, I'm not quite sure, but my dad decided there was too many elements, uncontrollable elements outside, so we should conduct this experiment in our laundry room. Now, the absurdity of that seems obvious to me in hindsight, but for some reason, my dad thought together we would light 2 fires in our laundry room and use the spray bottle to decide which line of attack, misty spray or direct line, put out the fire quicker. So there we are in our rec room lighting fires. We had popsicle sticks. It wasn't big, but we lit 2 fires. First, the direct line of spray, and it took about 30 seconds, house filling up with smoke, but we were able to get it out. The spray was a little slower, but it still worked eventually. Where my mom was, I don't know. We're lighting fires in the basement. Then my dad after is like, I don't know, that wasn't that exciting. Let's light another fire. So we lit another fire, and he decided, let's test whether or not a fire extinguisher would work to put these out quicker. So that's what we did. We put a fire in our laundry room, and then my dad decided to unload a fire extinguisher on this small little fire in our basement. Now, lighting fires is one thing. Unloading a whole thing of fire extinguisher canister, our whole basement was covered in this goopy fire extinguisher stuff. And to this day, I don't remember getting in trouble or my mom being upset. I'm not quite sure what was happening, but there we were dabbling with fire in my basement. Didn't seem like the smartest of things, but fire is mesmerizing to watch, right? Whether it's a campfire or your fireplace, fire like hypnotically draws us in as we watch it burn. Fire consumes, which makes this appearance from God really noteworthy to me. God appears as divine fire, but the bush is not consumed. And from the account we get, it seems as though like a botanist or anyone examining the bush would conclude that nothing about the bush had been changed or compromised. The bush remains itself, even as God's power is present and bursting forth from it. Which is a curious image of God, to be sure, but what might it tell us about God's power? Now, it was Richard Beck that pointed me to Sandra Eger's work. I'm grateful for that. He provided a nice summary because her work is dense. And I like what she does next, because using this image of God, what she does is she claims that we can look at all of creation as the burning bush. God is powerful, and that power is present everywhere. And when we think of God's power, instead of sort of imagining God considering, where and how should I use power? Instead of imagining that, we can think of God as the source of all power, and at times that power becomes visible and flashes out. Or you could say at times we become more aware of it. The question becomes, can you see it? Now, for Sonderegger, God isn't watching our world from a distance and arbitrarily intervening here and there. No, God is like a hidden fire that burns everywhere but doesn't consume or displace what it burns. Let this get your imagination going, and it becomes exciting, at least it does for me. Because here's a problem that I've encountered in the church many times before. A scenario like this. Someone becomes within faith community, somebody becomes sick, seriously sick, and we are asked to pray. Pray for someone to be healed, to be well again. And of course, the results of that vary. A lot of times people pray, nothing happens. Sometimes people, though, are healed. They overcome a serious illness. And in that moment, there's like this tension, because in some circles, it's like, my goodness, wow, God performed a miracle. God intervened to heal. At the same time, my cynical self thinks, but wait, maybe doctors were just doing what they do. Maybe science and medicine just did its work. And so often I felt stuck in this either or. Did God do this through power, or did medicine and science and doctors do this? And why I like this idea is that with God as the source of power, as divine fire burning everywhere, I don't feel like I have to choose. God's power doesn't consume or override the skills and power of the doctor. But in recognizing God as the source of power, as the divine fire burning in all of creation that sustains and gives life to all that heals, I can praise God and thank doctors and scientists at the same time. A doctor who heals isn't consumed or overpowered by God's power, but God is the divine fire that animates a doctor's ability to perform and heal. And I can't help but wonder, what would happen if we started seeing our world and each other as like the burning bush? Another way to understand this might be to think sort of analogically about God in terms of how the sun's power works. Now, of course, we would all say the sun is powerful, but its life-giving power is often invisible to us. I mean, consider this. NASA scientist C.S. Newton says this about the sun. To put this into a crazy context, every second the sun produces the same energy as about 1 trillion 1 megaton bombs. Now, side note here, little research. The only atomic bombs ever used in war were 15 kiloton bombs. That is 0.015 of a megaton bomb. Every second, the sun produces 1 trillion 1 megaton bombs. Newton continues, says this, in 1 second, our sun produces enough energy for almost 500,000 years of the current needs of our so-called civilization. If only we could collect it all and use it. 1 second of the sun's power could keep civilization going for 500,000 years. 1 second. And so think of God's power in a similar way to the power of the sun, and I think we start to get closer to what Sonderegger believes we should praise and worship as God's omnipotence, God's power. Like the sun, God is the source of all life and power and existence, but it's a power that's strangely unfamiliar to us. It's not like a power we can imagine where God sits and deliberates about whether or not to answer this prayer or that one. No, God's power is like the sun. It's like the burning bush. It burns throughout all of creation while animating and sustaining all things. God's power, you could almost say, is more like an energy. Sonderegger says this, the force that is God's very being radiates outward expands and explodes, never ceases or wearies, does not stand in reserve, but is always everywhere alive. Now, here's the thing. This is an analogy, and like any analogy, it can be pushed too far, it can break down. All analogies do. God isn't literally a father or literally a parent. God isn't literally energy. But this idea, I think, helps me. Let me tell you why. When I think about a God who causes all things through power, I struggle to worship that God because I get mired in questions of suffering. When I think about a God who causes some things, I struggle to worship that God as well because I get mired in wondering how God deliberates and decides. But when Sonderegger claims that God's power is the source of all power, power as energy, the burning bush that animates and sustains all of life, it gets my imagination moving in a more worshipful direction. Like that God I can sing to, you know? I can pray to that God I can delight in, find gratitude in. And of course, it's an analogy that if you push too far, it's got its own set of problems. I get that. But for me, it sort of awakens something in me. I mean, notice these words in Acts 17. Paul's trying to describe God to people in Athens, to Gentiles. And notice Paul's language here. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. I mean, think about that. What Sonderegger goes on to say is that when thought of this way, we come to see God's power as both generous and humble. Wherever there is life, God is author and sustainer of that. But as she notes, this generously powerful God is also humble, okay with being unseen, being backstage, you could say. The Lord does not lift up his voice as he sustains the world, does not announce his presence as he bears us from nothingness into the frail reality of creaturely life. God as divine fire and energy, a God who is generous with power but humble as well. Of course, I think one of the problems with this is it can feel impersonal. How does one relate exactly to fire or energy? Sonderegger suggests we think of ourselves as the bush. The fire of God in the bush in the Moses story changes nothing about the biological makeup of the bush. It's still a bush, just happens to be on fire with God's life force and energy. And it's the same with us in our world. God's power in our life doesn't override us or intervene upon us. It doesn't violate the fundamentals of who we are, or manipulate what makes us, us. Just like God's fire left the bush unscathed and not consumed. Now, it's certainly a mysterious relationship, but for Paul in Athens, the question becomes not how can I understand this God, but how can I seek this God and participate in divine energy? You know, I've always felt a bit not at home in certain Christian circles when talk of a personal relationship with Jesus comes up. Do you know what I mean? I mean, sometimes people like, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? I think I get what people mean, but the personal relationships I have and know are nothing like my relationship with God or Jesus is. It doesn't feel personal to me in the same way my relationship with Kristen or my kids or friends feels personal. But in thinking this way about God, I think to myself, well, of course my relationship with God doesn't feel like anything I know. We're talking about a relationship with fire, life, vitality, energy. How do you relate to that thing in which we live and move and have our being? Of course it doesn't feel personal, but I'm dealing with something that's sort of out of my realm. The kind of relationship we're talking about with God is like a union with a fire that burns through us. How can you get your head around that? Again, it's mysterious, it's mystical, but as Paul coaches us, I do think we can seek this God and participate in God's divine energy. How so? Let me suggest 6 quick things here. First is this: commit to following Jesus' path. What the Christian path asserts, of course, is that God is made flesh in Jesus. It's like lightning in a bottle, so to speak. This God is the source of all power. Divine energy manifests itself in the person of Jesus. And if we want to tap into God, a fire of divine energy, I will say this then: follow the Christian path. And I'm not an altar call kind of guy. I don't even know what that would look like, this format, but make that decision. Follow. God, Paul tells us, wants us to seek, reach out. It's the language of movement, of following, searching. The best thing I think we can do is follow and get to know Jesus, this power of God, lightning in a bottle, man, and do that, of course, in the context of community. That's, of course, our commitment here at Nexus. A part of me, though, thinks it also has to do with our posture in life, and I've been following John Mark McMillan as of late. I appreciate his music. He has this manifesto project he's working on where he's trying to re-enchant his faith, and I was struck by 2 lines in particular from his manifesto. First is this: the universe is a miracle. The world is brutal and wonderful. Life is hard, but it is a gift. Proceed with caution, but by all means proceed. These are hard and heavy times. And a lot of days I just feel numb, because there's a lot of emotional energy going around right now about race and whether or not we're allowed to leave our homes and see people. And a lot of days I just feel tired of feeling all the things. There's a numbness, a weariness that just feels like a constant companion. But I needed this line from McMillan. I needed it to remind me this whole thing is a miracle. Yes, life is hard, but it's a gift. I mean, there's laughter, there's thunderstorms and hot showers and sex and wine and music and swimming and coffee in the morning and watching your garden grow and rocking chairs on the porch and ice cubes in your water, and there's feeling angry and feeling sad and feeling happy. And the whole thing is just a miracle, the whole thing. A miracle that we get to experience any of it. One of my favorite bands is Arcade Fire, and their song, Signs of Life, is a bit of a mantra for me. Looking for signs of life goes the refrain, the chorus. What can we do in this brutal and wonderful world? What we can do is look for signs of life. Look for the burning bush. I was up at Kristen's family cottage this week, and outside the little hut where I was working, I noticed in the tree right in front of me, right at ground level, a nest. And I saw this hummingbird come and land in her nest, and I watched her intently as I think male suitors came, and she kind of tried to scurry them off and leave her nest and come back. And I was like, is there anything in there? And so I crept out, and the branch it was in was just above me, and I just gently pulled it down, and there inside the nest, 4 eggs. It was one of those moments, right, where it's just, I don't know, special. A sign of life, spring, summer bursting forward. One of those little reminders that signs of life are everywhere if you have eyes to see. So where are they? Where are these signs of life? I mean, I don't know about you, but I found signs of life marching with 20,000 other people declaring that Black Lives Matter. I see signs of life every Sunday morning when I tune in with you all and realize that behind this screen here is a community of people who haven't given up. Who haven't given up on faith, who haven't given up and given into despair. I mean, I find signs of life Every time I walk into the grocery store and almost everyone, is wearing masks because it's like this communal declaration, hey, we want to help and look out for each other. Or I find signs of life. Every time I laugh these days, it just feels extra special. Do you know what I mean? This declaration that, and even in hard times, you can't take away our laughter. I found a little sign of life in that little hummingbird nest, 4 eggs there this past week. A small thing, but again, a wake-up call. As Jesus says, seek and you will find. What Jesus' path is constantly telling us is to wake up. Signs of life, the burning bush is everywhere if we would but seek and reach out. Which is why Macmillan also says this: gratitude is the best posture towards God in the universe. This is so hard to come by these days. My list of grievances seems to grow while my gratitude list shrinks. But when we wake up to the miracle that is life, we realize how absurd it is that a posture of gratitude evaporates so quickly. And I'm reminded so often that gratitude is a discipline. Being thankful, reminded of the gift, it's hard work. Same couple days, I'm up at the cottage there, and I had this, it was Tuesday, it was perfect. And it was hot, and the kids were swimming, and I was reading a book out on the porch. I've got a beer in hand. It was just perfect. But then, as always happens, along comes these horse flies, black flies. I don't even know which they were, but they are annoying as all get out. Just suck the life right out of you. In this perfect moment, and I'm getting surrounded by these, and I just lost all sense of where I was and how grateful I should be. I told Kristen, I want to go home. This is insane. And she's like, do you realize where we are? And it's again one of those things like, right. So much to be grateful for. Life is a gift. That image of God as the burning bush, I think, should prompt us to gratitude, but it should also prompt questions within us like this. So where do you feel tapped into energy? Where do you feel on fire? Where do you feel vital and alive? Pay attention to those things. Because there's different ways to interpret our experiences in life, right? But if God is the divine fire of energy burning in all of us, then what makes us feel on fire or what gives us life and vitality is no accident. It's God burning within us, never consuming, but burning nonetheless. Those are the things to pay attention to. And for some of us right now, there's a fire burning in us over racial inequality. And that is not just the result of the news over the past few weeks. It's the giver of fire and life burning within us. For others of us, there's this passion to be cautiously safe right now. And again, that is not just paranoia. It's the sustainer and protector of life burning within you to do the same. For others, there's an ache in us, a pang of hurt echoing in us from not being able to see loved ones. And again, that's not just an evolutionary biological accident in our chemistry. It's the fire of love burning in us, reminding us to give and receive love is the very purpose of life. And so whatever it is that's firing you up, giving you life or vitality or making you feel all these things, pay attention to that because it's not just an accident. It's the divine fire burning within us. But what I notice about this burning bush scene is intriguing to me. It doesn't appear to Moses for some kind of personal, ecstatic experience. It calls Moses into service. And to me, that's worth noting. The burning bush always conscripts us into service. It's never about having a personal spiritual experience. I've got one of these friends, Instagram friend, and I'm not sure why I followed her, because I get annoyed sometimes, but she's always posting pictures of herself alone in the woods with hashtag this is my church, hashtag going to church. And I'm all for going to the woods alone. I think that's a great thing. We need those moments that refresh our souls. But Let's not mistake going to the woods for church. Let's not mistake going to the woods and having a personal experience for divine fire. The feeling we get being awed by nature is not the same thing as divine fire burning within us. If tapping into divine energy is about a personal experience, then it becomes a sort of spiritual consumption. It's part of the problem, seeing religion and spirituality as a good and service, something to be consumed. God will not consume you, but God will also not be consumed. What we feel on vacation or alone in the woods is just not the same thing as divine fire, because God as divine fire will always conscript you into service. I mean, notice what happens to Moses after his experience. The Lord said from the burning bush, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Wow. Is that not a powerful word from God right now? You think God doesn't see what's going on with the Black community? You think God is not concerned? But the point is this: the divine fire is always conscripting people into service. God as divine energy does not exist for the spiritual equivalent of a day at a theme park. God's power burns within us for service. Wherever you experience that divine fire, energy, vitality, remember it comes with a call. Now go, help. Finally, what we realize about God's power is that God is generous and humble. God is generous and humble. Are we? How generous are we being right now? Even in this, all of this, are we able to be generous with our time, with our money, with our energy? You know, I think crisis, at least feel this way about myself, often brings out both the best and worst in us, right? Generosity is a great litmus test for how we are doing. Are we still willing to give even when we're scared of what our financial futures might look like? Are we willing to give our energy to something even when it feels like we have no more energy to give? What about our humility? Are we okay to learn and not teach? Are we okay to give and serve without being noticed? God as divine energy gives and gives without interference, without need for recognition. The God of the burning bush is generous and humble, and calls us to be the same. Friends, thanks for your time this morning. Remember that right after the service here, there's a Zoom link that we're going to jump on, a bit of a test for next week, but we can chat about this Sunday, and you'll find the link for that below. But I hope you'll join us. A great way to connect after the service here, but also a bit of a test, because next week we want to have our family meeting that way together. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your presence. Go in peace.
Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to arise. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly into the light of a dark black night. blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly.